Good morning, everyone. Hi.
Good morning.
Good to see you all. So we're still at 21 of 30.
You will not cuss.
Good morning.
You will not this. You will not that. You will not this. So we couldn't be ourselves on here. Even if you didn't agree with it.
Somebody's microphone is muted.
For some reason, I don't have chat on my screen. Oh, I see it. Never mind. I'm sorry.
So if you haven't noticed, please type your name in the chat for attendance purposes.
Professor.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that that I'm still here. My camera has been acting up this past week. I just wanted to let you know that.
Okay. Thank you. So let's see. So next week is spring break. That's great, right? Everybody gets a little bit of time away from the screen. So I wanted to start with the responses to the Pictures Revisited exhibition that I asked you all to sort of look at and respond to in some way. So, you know, a little bit of reminder and context about this show. You know, this was in what was it, 1974. And really, you know, as I'd mentioned, visual art in the 20th century had sort of gone through a bunch of isms, if you will. And ultimately, you know, after abstractionism and conceptualism and performance art and a variety of other things, you know, there was a very influential critic named Clement Greenberg who had sort of encouraged this tendency to make art about its essence. In other words, painting about paint. So, you know, oftentimes when you went into a gallery, you would either see a very abstract painting or nothing at all, which was kind of maybe some things on the ground that were evidence of a performance that had happened or a happening that had happened prior to your visit to the gallery. But, and so really art had kind of went completely away from visual representation and narrative storytelling. Those two things had become really taboo in the art world and the visual art world. And even in music, there was a movement towards minimalism, and a lot of other disciplines and mediums also sort of went through that in the mid to late 20th century. This exhibition comes along, and for the first time in decades, really, you went to an exhibition and you saw images, pictures, hence the name of the show, the Pictures Show. And so at the time, this was, you know, shocking. Oh my gosh, we see things we recognize. And in particular, photography was a big part of this exhibition. And so, you know, there was a couple of other really important things to mention that I haven't brought up in the past, but this was one of the very first exhibitions to use something that we call appropriation. Now, appropriation is essentially someone using someone else's photograph or whatever else and calling it their own. In particular, Sherry Levine was notorious for taking those pictures that I showed you of Ed Weston's son, Neil, and simply putting those up on the wall and calling it after Ed Weston. And so this was also kind of controversial. I think in some ways it still is, where, you know, people are repurposing is one way to think about it, other existing photographs. Also, a lot of the work, especially Cindy Sherman's work, for example, sort of focused on the media, in her case, B movies, and especially how women are represented in those sort of low budget Hollywood films. And so her sort of shtick was that she, and she still actually works now, I shouldn't say then, but this particular body of work called, you know, that, forget, Untitled something that I can't remember, but these all were sort of like riffs on B movies. So with those things in mind, who would like to sort of start and tell me about your experience at the show?
I could say a little something.
Or you want to show something or?
No, because I had submitted I like writing things right now because I guess at the moment I'm a little bit technologically challenged. So I guess until I get a new camera and things like that, I'll submit things of a more artistic value. But I guess what I noticed with Pictures Revisited, I guess I remarked on the fact, like, first I had to, I guess, redefine what appropriation meant. Like I had to Google that and find out what you just basically explained, like a repurposing of images. And I guess that kind of contributed to my lack of connection with I I appreciated the artistic value, but in comparison to maybe Camowing or however you pronounce that, I noticed myself, I was a little less intrigued with maybe like the artwork, but more intrigued with the backstory. And I realized that with a lot of art, or maybe like even musicians sometimes, it's just the backstory that could be sometimes more appealing, and it gives maybe a bland image or, a bland artist more of a backstory that, wow, oh my God, this is riveting, this is compelling. So it was a lot of, the pictures, like for instance, an example was La Clase from Marcelo Brodsky. And it was a class picture like that took place during the Argentinian War. And like he was circling faces and crossing some out. And then once I actually clicked the explanation behind the picture, it was a little chilling because it was like some of his classmates disappeared, some died, like what happened with these people. So it was just like the repurposing of that image that kind of stuck out to me. But for the most part, I was just, checking through the images, and I was just like, I was finding that I was more interested in the paragraph that came with the picture rather than the actual picture. And those paragraphs provided a lot of context. So I appreciated that,
Well, thanks. I think those are some very insightful ideas. It has been the case for quite a while now that, when you go to see an exhibition, you're sort of expected to have that background knowledge, right? So if you don't understand why these things are being done, why appropriating something, or then it's less clear and less interesting to sort of view the artwork. But yeah, that particular image that you quoted is really chilling to see how many people of his classmates had died. And that was another thing. Here's our art that's addressing politics, right? So there was another piece in there that talked about Clinton's affair. And so instead of, big, deep, anxious, angst being splattered onto canvas, they're talking about contemporary issues. And so politics as well. So, great. Okay, so I see.
I can share if you want.
There's a hand up actually, and I can't tell who it is because I'm.
Oh, it's me, Jessica.
Yeah, Jessica, great. Go ahead.
So I went to the Met to see this exhibition. I was surprised I was seeing before. I think I saw like 2 months ago when I went. And I was amazed because the first time that I went, I didn't like even read what was in the the side of the pictures. And this time I take the time and read it like each picture. I was like really surprised about one particular like piece that they have there. I think is three poster from the Met, and I think they have like the word iron. I don't remember, but basically they collect three poster from the Met, and then they sell it back to them. And I was like, it was clever. And in the like I was thinking also of how like Marcel Duchamp, I think it was, how he like bought a toilet, I think it was, and then sell it to a museum. And I was thinking like sometimes like for most of the people, art is more like for the meaning, right? So for me, it was clever. Just buy like they bought poster in the Met, and then like later on they sell it to the Met too. And I don't know, it was the most like striking work over there for me.
It
It was like
this one,
clever.
right? 4 posters.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, one of the other tenets of postmodernism that was sort of popular and still is in a way is what they call meta work. So it's work about work about work. It's like in this case, the poster, it's kind of a joke, and yet it's not really a joke. It's seriously joking, if you will. So yeah, so I'm glad you got to see it in person, because the reproductions were really quite small, I thought. And I didn't get to see it in person, unfortunately, but who else has a comment?
I have a comment,
Go ahead.
Professor. I found very inspiring what the people before me said. I too perceive this exhibition like more appealing to my intellectual side more than my visual appreciation side or my emotional side. But it inspired me in a sense that it gave me an aura of thoughts, of new thoughts, like Rauschenberg, the erased de Kooning. I find it parallel to this notion that they tried to transmit in the exhibition. And then I was really caught by I think that it made me understand for the first time what the contextualization means. And it was strong because in my work, I tried to see notions of exile and transboarding and crossing borders and exile. So to see, really to feel what the contextualization is was strong. And I sent you a text and an image. I don't know if I can share it, but I made an image that was made of a photography I took for my studio. I'm in a complete shutdown. So it was a drawing of mine. So it was this thing of how do you use images in order to transmit something else. In this sense, I took the contextualization thing, that it can project to another thing, your images, like they can cross borders, they can connect and like have a conversation with another spheres. So in this sense, it was provoking, this exercise, very much.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what you said there. And provocative is certainly something that this show was. And, it sort of looked back on as a very sort of, as a real moment of change in visual art, and how we went from, you sort of, I think, it's sort of incidentally sort of mentioned that, a version of there's no craft left in these, right? Like painters before this time period, artists of all kinds were sort of half judged on how well they made things, and then other things about its beauty and its content and its ideas. And so much of this was based on, reappropriating and refining and recontextualizing, as you were saying, objects. So does anybody have any? Yes. Okay.
I can share.
Yeah, go ahead, Gracie.
I don't know if I can share my screen.
Oh, let me give you privileges.
So manage share after Gracie finishes sharing.
Sure. All right, you shouldn't be able to now, Gracie. Oh, I might have to stop mine.
So can everybody see it?
Yes.
So I did this digital like collage based off of pictures that I took of myself. It was inspired by Susie Lake's piece and Richard Prince, I believe. And I wanted to play in the whole idea of, you know, what is appropriation, what's copying, because I know for me, I didn't come from a photography background. And so when I was making my portfolio coming into grad school, a lot of the times my teachers would say, you can't use an image off the internet, you can't use, you know, a piece of work that somebody else has already done. So a lot of the times I ended up having to either paint myself, photograph myself, draw myself. So I wanted to kind of play with these two images that I took at different times. I think one was like 2 years ago and one was recently. And I liked how Susie did the collages of the faces. And it was kind of her twist on like, you know, what is beauty and what is not. And I wanted to completely just take out the face. I wanted to, you know, take that aspect out. And I like how Richard Prince, I forget what the name of his piece was, but he had like all the photographs kind of lined up horizontally. And I just liked that composition. And that's kind of what I took from it. I was kind of like, can you appropriate your own work, if that makes sense? Almost like, you know what I mean? You know, since I feel like everybody now, it's, oh, you're copying this, you're copying that, you know, but in my head, you know, nothing is original anymore.
Well, that's a very provocative statement there. And I think that quite a bit of the sort of postmodern thought agrees with that idea that there is no such thing as originality. And that's a very controversial thing, I think, with artists. But the more you know about art history, the more you know about art, the more often you find that somebody has done whatever your idea is differently, but, you know, it's the same thing. And so postmodernism sort of like, the thing I took away from it, from my own work that was so kind of freeing is like, I don't have to be original. Like, I don't have to wake up every morning and think, I'm going to make something that no one has ever seen before. That's a hell of a burden to put on yourself each day when you go into the studio, right? So instead, I can allow myself to say, okay, I've been influenced by X, Y, and Z, and that's okay. And I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I mean, I really liked your the repetition was really interesting. And then that sort of, there's flat areas of color and then photographic depth to it at the same time. And that seemed also to be sort of relevant to the way people were, you know, as I keep saying, recontextualizing the imagery. But I love that idea of, can you appropriate yourself? I think that's a really interesting, again, a kind of meta.
Just a thought that I had.
Right? So, and since meta is a part of postmodern thought, it's sort of, I don't know how you do it, but it's really interesting. All right, so who wanted, it was AJ, I think, right?
Yes. When I was looking at the pieces, I was more inclined to this one question as well, this one statement that you shouldn't really judge things just by looking at it alone. And one of the pieces that sprang this out to me was by Hank Thomas, "Smoking Joe Ain't Your Mama." When I was first looking at this piece, I thought of like old advertisements. But then as soon as he got to the piece, like later on, it says like Black reflections in corporate America. And then when I saw the story, like, oh, this has like a deeper meaning. But I had never like put two and two together that this was supposed to like show something entirely different. Like when I looked at the piece itself, I didn't think something that was meant to be as it was described before, emasculating. I thought like, oh, this is supposed to be like something nostalgic, like Smoking Joe is supposed to be represented as like a mom, as like a mama's boy and stuff like that. And when it said Aunt Jemima, I thought, oh, Aunt Jemima. And back then, I know that currently right now people are getting together to try and get rid of the Aunt Jemima icon because of its because of its considered racism. But then when I thought of the image, and then I thought of Aunt Jemima, I didn't think racist. I thought, oh, this is Sunday morning pancakes before church.
With a bonnet?
Yeah, with the bonnet. I thought of something cheery and helpful. But then that was also another thing during this time when like the black and white, when whites were feeling threatened by African Americans, that sudden status quo. When you look at this, you see an adult African American, but you don't think of him as dangerous. It makes it even more ironic since he's a boxer.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Hank Willis Thomas's work does deal with how African Americans have been represented in the media throughout, time, really. And so, this one I think is really a fascinating sort of gender study, and also really, I think, very critical of the Aunt Jemima sort of, the maid slash cook slash servant, which is basically just a modern version of a slave, really. So, and yes, I think very effectively that a number of people have gotten together to try to get rid of the kind of representation of African-American people. And Aunt Jemima is a very clear one, because it's sort of antebellum in that kind of like Southern way. And I think they've been effective. I think it's gone from what I remember. I'd have to check again, but I don't think you can buy that syrup with that image on the bottle anymore, which is great. I mean, I think that should have been gone a long time ago. But does anybody else have comments on this?
I just have one comment that what we are talking here made me think that maybe this exhibition marks us. I put it in the chat that we have to reread what is the notion of authenticity and honesty in art making, because it really changes this. What is authenticity and what is to be honest? Because Gracie said, "Can I appropriate myself?" And so, where is the artist in his authenticity and his honesty? I think it's a problem that goes on till now and stronger.
Well, I mean, that word authenticity is also something that's really interesting, because certainly during like the conceptual era and postmodernism, authenticity was something that was to be avoided, really. And I think that in the past decade or two, we've really returned to that idea that, creative people should have some sort of, authentic, their output should be, represent who they are in some way. And that idea had not been very popular for quite a while. So I'm just looking at the chat here. So all right, let's have a couple more comments. And anybody else?
Professor, I have a question.
Sure.
About the exhibition. I think it was the piece called the work called The Secret. I didn't quite understand like the concept. I was wondering if you can explain it.
Let's find it, and I'll try to talk to
Okay.
it about it. So yeah, the Mike Kelly one. That's what I thought you were talking about. Well, Mike Kelly is a conceptual artist, performance artist, multidisciplinary, very edgy performance artist. And so in this case, he's really, he's talking about, and this was a very popular topic with Andy Warhol as well, is like our obsession with celebrity, right? How, you know, those tabloid magazines that used to be at the checkout counter when you went to the grocery store, or, you know, Us magazine, and all these other kinds of things that focus on celebrity culture. And of course, celebrity culture is rather shallow compared to culture in a larger context, like you might see in the Met Museum, for example. And so, you know, he again, this is one that addresses a contemporary sexual scandal, the Bill Clinton, you know, issue. And so he's trying to take existing materials and then address that idea of how shallow popular culture is. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I have my hand up.
Okay, yes, Vanessa, go ahead.
So I actually made something. I'm not a huge fan of reappropriation, but when I learned about Deschamps and his ready-made, and I started to appreciate it a little bit more. But then there was a woman who did his urinal and dipped it in gold. I can't remember her name, but I just thought that was kind of ridiculous. I don't know. I just have problems with reappropriation. So I'm going to share my something that I put together for this exhibit.
Great.
If I could share.
I gave you a co-host privilege.
Okay. Yes. So I have like a whole bunch of old Rolling Stone magazines, and I thought of there has to be some kind of cigarette advertisement, which they don't do anymore. So I again, this is all cut and paste. I don't have computer graphic skills, but can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I sort of just changed the ridiculous of the advertising, and added all these little absurd comments to it. And again, this is reappropriating advertising. It's also taking these this old way of thinking that cigarettes, look, you can buy a pack, 3-pack and get holiday music with this. It's like, what? So I just thought it was so ridiculous. I wanted to make it even more ridiculous. And so I added lots of little comments to that. And again, this is inspired by just like pop art from the 60s and Andy Warhol, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also reminiscent of Barbara Kruger, because she would take stock photographs and then put this text on the surface, which is another sort of postmodern, you know, pictures generation idea of using text. And I mean, I really think this is great. It's very, you know, it clearly indicts the tobacco industry. I actually like your craftsmanship. You did a good job sort of blending things together. And
then that's tobacco's reappropriation in itself. You know, it was a Native American commodity in a sense, and then became the all-American way of doing things is smoking cigarettes. You know?
It was very popular in Europe as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does a really good job of indicting that kind of era of sort of selling poison. I mean, I was a smoker for a long time, and I just can't believe I used to do that. You know, I mean, I'm not the person who always indicts smokers, the ex-smoker that's so bad, but you know.
I can't believe that they advertise you can get free holiday music with with a 3-pack or a carton.
All kinds of marketing campaigns from tobacco companies that were very sort of iffy and controversial. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I love this piece. I think you did a great job with it. It really, I think, addresses some of those ideas in the exhibition as well. So this is great. Does anybody else have any comments about this one?
You did a great job collaging. Like, it's blends so seamlessly.
Yeah,
I can see all the mistakes, but that's me.
It looks like one whole ad. I would never think that you cut them out and put them together.
If I knew how to use Photoshop, I'd take a lot other stuff off, but yeah.
It does look like Photoshop, so don't worry about it.
No, it does
Okay.
look really good. The craftsmanship is really, really well done. So,
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I'll unshare this.
okay. So I don't know who was next. Was it Gregory or Cole?
Gregory can go next. That's fine.
Okay.
Did
Gregory?
you call on me?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was like amazing. I really love everything there. I thought it was really Photoshop at first. Am I also sharing or am I just commenting?
I gave you co-host privileges, so if you have something to show, that would be great.
Got it. Give me 1 second. I'll look for it. I'm on my phone. Am I not able to see the response? I put it on Blackboard, but I also emailed it to you.
Oh, I thought you were going to share it from your screen. Do you have it on your phone that you could?
Yep, I'm looking right
I'm
now.
not actually sure how to do that because I've never done that from a phone.
Maybe I could go from my computer if you could let me in from there. If
Sure.
that's easier.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're getting set up. Let's see what Cole has to say.
Got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I guess I have been going back and forth about whether or not I wanted to share what I made because I'm kind of embarrassed of it, but I think I do. So yeah, can I share? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're a co-host now.
Awesome.
Well, this is not about making great art, and I want to be clear about the VREs. You don't have to, make great art. They're just a kind of way of interpreting the exhibition and showing us. And I don't even want you to spend a whole lot of time working on them because they should be just kind of, relatively quick responses to what you've seen.
Can you guys see?
Yes.
Okay, so this is it's a photo montage I made. Has acrylic paint. There's a lot of other things on there too. There's a testosterone needle. There's actually part of a testosterone prescription, and really the main portion is this men's health magazine where I took a picture.
I lost you after Men's Health magazine. Is it just me?
I chose this one because of the name Body Transformation Special, and I actually I called this work "We Have the Prescription." So really, yeah, through appropriation, I just wanted to question ideas of what transformation is, of what masculinity is, and really, I mean, does at the end of the day, does the flatness of my chest now help me in performing masculinity in some way? Like, do I have to look like this person to be a man? Yeah, so that's kind of what I was going for.
Great. I did lose sort of a large chunk in the middle when you were explaining. But no, I think it's fantastic. And I think some of the people in the chat are also saying good things. It's that's such a weird magazine in a way because of, as you're saying, performing masculinity. It's like this complete just act. I mean, it's been happening to women's magazines forever, but now that we're starting to see men's magazines doing this same sort of unattainable, idealistic male body, it's you know, it's kind of ridiculous in one way, and yet it's about time that, you know, tables were changed as well. So, and I'm sure, you know, for you this is very personal as well, and that's really great how you can take something, you know, that's very important to you and sort of use that. I mean, there was stuff in the chat about authenticity just minutes ago, and of course this is sort of coming from that kind of place as well. So, but yeah, it's really great. Does anybody else have
Good,
comments on
thank
that
you.
one? Any other comments? Okay. So are there any other hands up? We were waiting for AJ, I think. Somebody, no, it wasn't AJ. Who was it that had to go? You were actually saying about authenticity. All right. Okay. So let's move on, because we're sort of finished, I think, with this. We've talked about it for 40
I'm
minutes.
ready, Professor.
All right. Okay. All right. Yes. Go ahead. Let me make you a co-host. All right. There you go. You okay?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. It's showing up. Got it. Can you guys see?
Yes. So tell us about it. What are you responding to, and what's the concept behind it?
So what I'm responding to here is let me see the artist's name. That's what I was trying to put on the screen, the artist's name. Well, I was saying in general, I was responding to the ones that use cards. There was a lot of them that use envelopes, like they were sending a letter to the person specifically. It's like they wanted them to recognize that art is both a way to express yourself and to say something. And sometimes the words have more meaning than the image itself. So I was trying to add a little bit more meaning to the fact that this could be like a card you send to somebody, like a loved one, of maybe like these are the postcards or these are the stamps. And these are my own photos that I've taken over the years. I chose black and white to keep the theme of, you know, old age type of photos, very emotional. And I try to use the words look again to make the person who just looked at this image or work look again at the image and actually realize what they just saw, for them to see the meaning behind it. I also added "This is for you" from Gregory Jesua. That's my artistic name. I wanted them to see that this is for them. I want them to see everything about it and appreciate it. Did you notice it? Did you actually take the time to think about it, to see the work, to appreciate all the work that maybe we put into it, hours and hours of our time into it? And look again is to ask you again, are you finished looking at it? If you want to keep looking at it, if you missed anything. And I added the words at the end of P.S. we are watching as a subtle hint of everybody in the pictures. I made them intentionally look at the camera. I chose these pictures specifically. And the PS we are watching is about the photos when you're done seeing everything, to realize that all the photos are actually looking at you while you admire the photo. So in a way, you are the photo. and this is the photo for you. That's all.
All right, that's wonderful. I really like the airmail stripes on there as well. It seems to give it a kind of, message, like you said, a postcard. It looks like that those red, blue, and white stripes are often on an international airmail letter envelope. So, but yeah, I assumed that the picture's for you when you sent it to, or yours when you sent it to me. And I really like that idea that, you intentionally chose the ones that are looking at the camera and therefore through the lens to us, the viewer. All right. Any other comments on this one?
I like it. But what I even like more is the explanation behind it. Because like for me, what is consistent, everything is art. Like I could hold this like a cell phone up and it's a random phone, you know what I'm saying? But then I can break down and cry, this is the last phone that my grandmother, and then now it transforms the regular phone into now a sentimental object. So it's just like the story is so transformational for me, using that word again, but it's just really like I love the story behind things. Like sometimes even songs, it's just an average song, but then now someone has dedicated that song to someone. Now that song becomes even more powerful. So it's just like I love the context behind things. I'm one thing where it's just like I don't understand how one painting could be worth 10 million. Meanwhile, there's a homeless person peddling their wares for $2 a piece. You know what I'm saying? And that disturbs me, is just the inequity of just like, who says, like even the article we read with Errol Smith, like what dictates those pictures of whether the cannonballs are on or off? What dictates the importance behind the art? And that's what fascinates me, because, everybody wants, not everybody, I take that back because that's changing. But, things are relative. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you brought up the value of art, which is, I think, completely irrelevant to the art making process and the enjoyment of art. And that, it's hard to avoid it when you hear, like, I think it was last week, something, I forget the technical name of them, but a digital JPEG went for $63 million. And you just wonder, as you said, like, yeah,
Wow.
all of these, problems in the world with, basic shelter and food and warmth and all that. But I mean, that's not something we can do in this class, certainly. But, that whole world of the art gallery scene and the art, the auction world. Cole emailed me, this week to point out that some of the Fox Talbot images are going to be auctioned off soon. Remember Fox Talbot from the beginning of the history of photography. And I did some more research on that, and they were actually images that were given by Fox Talbot to that family. And they had stayed in that family the whole time, and now they're selling them. And, hopefully they'll go to an institution rather than to a private collection where nobody will see them. But that's kind of doubtful because institutions are starving right now. So, the separation between art making and art enjoying and viewing, and then the marketplace for art is massive. And yes, you're right. Like, who determines that thing? What is it that made one artist more, desirable than another artist? And I think every artist at some point questions that, of any kind, of musicians, or, I know tons of great musicians who should have gotten a record deal and should be super famous, but they're not. And why is it that other ones are? And it's the same thing with visual art, and writers are wondering why certain books get published when theirs didn't get published or whatever. So, and that's a very, yeah, Beeple, that's right, thank you. Yes, Beeple was the artist. He had actually sort of digitally collaged a bunch of his own digital creations, but there's a brand new idea in digital art where they essentially, and I don't fully understand it, and it's all happening in the like Bitcoin style world. So the money is also like not currency, it's a non-fungible something, an NFT, a non-fungible whatever, but you know, basically Beeple put together a bunch of his own digital collages. And Gregory, could you sort of unshare? Thank you.
But I think that what I heard in what Omar said, he talked about the narrative and the context behind. So that's again brings us back to the decontextualization and why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So.
No, I agree, and that was also interesting. That you know, some people really complain if they go into a gallery. I don't understand what's on the wall. I shouldn't have to have all this back knowledge to just go enjoy art. And you know, I can see that point of view, but I can also see the point of view that we were just talking about, where knowing more about the work makes it more interesting, and the more you know about the artist and the work, the more interesting the art becomes. So. Yeah.
Can I also comment that, like, I understand what Amari is saying, that yes, it is transformable. It does transform what art can be, but I have a problem with it at times, just because I feel like, people, whoever like creates something and then later on someone else takes it and changes it or dips it in gold or whatever it is. I just feel like it's okay. It does transform it into something new, and that's appreciation in some new form. But I just feel like if like, let's say the next couple of generations, they see this art and they're like, wow, I've never seen. But there's no reference to the original, like, or there's not enough research to know what the original was. So, that's the problem I have with reappropriation. It's just, I feel like, I don't know. I have a problem with it. I like it and I don't like it.
Well, I understand. And from a photographer's point of view, it concerns me that somebody else is going to take one of my images, do something to it, and then resell it for more money than I ever made on it. But in one sense, I think also, at least the postmodern point of view on that is that contemporary people live in a world of media, right? We don't live in trees and farms and mountains and stuff. We live on screens, especially this past year, but just in general, since the 60s or so. We've spent our lives either in magazines or now websites or on screens in a variety of ways, and television. And so it's just as valid for an artist to respond to their environment being a screen as it is a magazine, whatever other piece of media that we consume, than it would be to respond to a tree. In a way, it's more authentic because all the trees I see are planted by humans and put there on purpose. I don't, it's a really tough balance. And I understand what you're trying to say. And I question it as well. When I teach, I try to teach the point of view so that students can get an understanding of what it is and what its importance is. I love your comment about just gilding the urinal. I'll use that in another class at some point, but and this stuff is controversial, and it has been since the show. So I think that's why we talk about it in class, and we try to understand why they did it, and we can agree with it or not, but that's your own taste, and you're welcome. You should have your own opinions about such things. So we had a good conversation about some of the issues, and maybe we should move on to the review, unless there's any kind of final summing up. Does anybody have any final comments? Okay, well, this was a good conversation, and thank you all. So I do want to try to find that Beeple thing just because it's in the news right now and it's worth sort of, discussing. Non-fungible something, NFT, right? Actually find the image. So let's go ahead and share this. It's also photographically based, so that's another reason to sort of briefly discuss it before we move on. But so this was the original, the so-called original Beeple, and it's basically a huge collage of his own work. So, I've seen representations of just parts of it, and each one of these individual squares are something that he made digitally, and that's important to understand because there's no physical object. You're not buying a thing, which is, I think, a really interesting new idea for art and sales of art, right? You're not buying a painting, a photograph, a sculpture, whatever it may be, but you're buying the right to call it your own, if that makes sense. That's the best I can understand it. Here's some of the parts of it. And, they're funny, they're political, they're, see if I can get more details. So this is one of the more famous individual squares in there. And a bunch of artists have really jumped on this. A bunch of other people have made lots of money very quickly, making these NFTs. And I guess the best way I can explain the NFT is that it is the right, like I said a moment ago, at least I'm not sure. I've tried to figure it out, but from what I can tell, you're buying the right to call that your own. There's no thing that you can put on your wall or that you can, well, you can resell it. And that's the interesting part, because then only one person can own it. And then you can resell that to another collector if you choose to. All of the transactions are happening on through that currency world that is not, doesn't have a country associated with it. It's all digital currency. So when he says he sold it for $69 million, well, he got digital currency worth that much, which he could probably sell for that much cash, but it wasn't like somebody wrote a check for that amount or anything like that.
What does NFT stand for?
Non-fungible. Let me just get the last word, but it's a new sort of designation.
Token. That's the last word, token.
Okay.
Yeah.
Token. Okay,
You're a small business with big goals, and Sage Accounting can help you reach them. With time.
Go back. We'll just turn that off. Yes. Non-fungible token. Okay, so that's what it is. So basically, what an artist does is they make something. In this case, he used a lot of 3D modeling programs to make the individual panes. A lot of them look like scenes from a science fiction movie. And then you sort of somehow register that with a particular online registry. And it is now sort of like as I tried to explain, like that's the ownership of that, in this case, JPEG. And you can transfer that ownership to someone else, and they're the owner then. So that's what the non-fungible part, fungible in like, in macroeconomics, a fungible item is like a dollar bill. You can spend that on anything. You can, whatever currency it is, that's a fungible piece of currency. Non-fungible currencies are recorded in a computer somewhere that apparently are using massive amounts of energy, by the way. And it's something that I can't go into a store and buy something with Bitcoin, for example. I can't pay my bills with Bitcoin, but I could sell my Bitcoin to somebody else for cash, US dollars, and then spend that money. So that's what non-fungible means. You can't just use it anywhere like fungible. currency is. And so anyways, this has been a big thing this past few weeks, and you might be interested in doing some research on that. Somebody could do their oral presentation or even their final project on it. It's an interesting new idea. So, any thoughts or comments on that? No? You all heard about this? Is this something new to you or not?
Never
This
heard
is
of it.
brand new.
Yeah.
He's now the artist that has sold his work for the third highest amount of any artist ever. He's like 22. And I don't know if he's that young, but he's in his 20s. And he's actually, if you've been around Lehman for a while, he's a friend of Carlo Diego's, our old tech from the digital tech. Okay, so. All right, let's take our break now, and we'll start again at 12:32 or 33 with the review, and we'll discuss everything then, okay?
Professor, I have a question.
Sure.
For the exam, because this is my first semester, so I've never taken an exam online. Are we gonna log into Blackboard to take it, or?
I've been asking myself the same question. I think what will happen is that the day of the assessment, I will send you all a document that you'll fill out during the time period allotted, and then email it back to me. That's how I'm thinking right now. What is everybody back? I just want to make sure that I'm not saying something that other people will miss, but we have 24 here. So, all right, let's just get started talking about. So 2 weeks from today, next week, of course, is spring break. You will receive something in your email sometime in the morning before class that will have, hopefully everybody can read a Word document, because I think that's the most common one. I think that CUNY gives you all Microsoft Suite for free with your tuition. So everybody should be able to open a Word document. What's likely to happen, there will be a series of slides on the screen that will automatically advance and loop. And that's very important. I just want to remind you that if you miss something or you don't have time to do something, it will come back around, okay? And then you will answer the questions that are both on the Word document I sent you and also on the screen with the images. So that's generally what to expect. There will also be a couple of longer sort of short essay questions at the end. So there'll probably be approximately 20 images to briefly discuss. I'll ask you things like, why is this picture important? Or, what kind of process was used to make this picture? And you'll hear that when I do the actual review. That's where I'm at the moment. I've been trying to research different approaches towards sort of giving these kinds of assessments online, because it's my first semester to do such a thing as well. And nobody seems to have a good solution. There are some very invasive software packages that sort of, force you to not have any other browser screens open or something like that. But everybody has a phone too, so there's no point in that. You will all have the 3.5, what is it, 10:20 to 2 to do 11:20 to 2 to do the assessment, and then return that to me within an hour or so after class ends. So let's say by 3 or 3:30, you'll get it back to me.
I have a question. I think that for me, I have this rejection with this technology that doesn't work. Can I ask for help? For example, I told Cole that maybe he could help me technically if I have problem with the document. If we talk about authenticity and honesty, I mean, just give us the faith that we'll won't misuse it. But I do think that I don't see myself being able to do it technically, maybe, this whole thing. So can we help each other? Can I ask for help from somebody else? Or
yes and no. I mean, if that is going to impair Cole's ability to take the assessment, then I don't think it's fair to ask him to be doing that. Just to be clear, it's going to be a Microsoft Word document that you'll open from the email, fill it out, and email it back. Is that beyond you?
so it's a document that comes to me open. I can write in it.
Right. And then you send it back.
No, it sounds okay. It sounds okay.
I mean, we could maybe test that to see.
Maybe you send us before a document like this and we answer, hi, okay, and send it back to you.
So
I
send
don't
me
know.
an email and I will send you a sort of test version of the assessment, okay?
Professor, can I ask what specific day you're talking about?
2 weeks from today.
Okay, so that's not next week, Tuesday, but the Tuesday after.
April 8th.
So next week is spring break, so there's no classes next week.
April 8th.
Thank you, Amari. All right, let's get started with the actual review so we have time to finish it. If you have questions at the end and then we have time, I can answer them. So, obviously these 3 pictures are important images for you to remember. I'll talk about each one of them individually in just a moment, but just sort of, the top image is the view from the window in Le Gras, and it's by Nicéphore Niepce. It's considered to be the first photograph ever made, at least the first permanent photograph ever made. So that's obviously an important thing to try to remember. The one on the bottom left is a daguerreotype taken in Paris. And it's the first image of a human being in a photograph. It's that sort of highlighted corner down there is a man taking, having his shoes shined. And you'll notice that there's no cars on the road, or no horse-drawn horses or buggies on the road. There's no people on the street. And that's because the exposure time was about 10 to 15 minutes. And that's why all the people kind of disappeared. And then the image on the right is a Henry Fox Talbot image. The first image made with the Talbot-type process or the calotype process. It's an image of his windows from inside his estate. And he's kind of, that's the first negative ever made, right?
Professor, the daguerreotype picture, I'm just curious because it's so tiny and I haven't.
We'll look at them all individually.
Yeah, no. My question is, how come the customer and not the shoe shine guy is in the picture? Because he was there too. That's kind of odd.
The guy's sort of like moving around him, and he's in motion. But the guy with his shoe on the stand is literally just standing still the whole time. And so it might have even been 2 people, by the way. We don't know. Like one guy could have gotten his shoes done, and then another one sort of stepped in as well.
That's true. Okay. Thank you.
So, the idea of the camera obscura had been known for thousands of years. The first image of the camera obscura is this. Remember, camera is room, obscura is dark. So this is simply a dark room with a hole in the wall. And the optics and the physics of this essentially project an image upside down and backwards on the opposite wall. And so this is the very first lens. It's shaped like a, lens comes from the word bean, by the way, a lentil. And it's sort of, double convex, which is sort of like a bean shape, right? So they initially were invented, by the way, to start fires, to make it easier to make a fire before matches were available. So, and this is a sort of portable version of a camera obscura. At this point, they've added a lens in the front of it to make the image brighter. And it's got a ground glass and a mirror for an artist to then trace the image that's projected onto that mirror. Again, here's the first picture ever made. This is a name and a date you should remember. You should remember it's the first picture ever made. Yes, for Niepce, 1826, view from the workroom at Le Gras, first successful permanent photograph. That's what it looks like now. You don't see anything. I went to see it in person just to bow down to it, and it's just that it's in a little darkened space. It's impossible to see anything. But on the left, you can see some sort of computerized enhancements, and then on the right is a digital CGI version of what he would have been looking at out the window. So you can see how the shapes and all that. But essentially, it's just a picture out a window of somebody's house. So these two guys took over the mantle of what had been going on. Niepce died quite early, not very long after that original photograph. And Daguerre had actually visited him like a week before he died. Fox Talbot didn't know anything about him, but that's a separate issue. So these two guys, though, were really the first people to make viable photography happen. And each one of their inventions had its own strengths and its own weaknesses. And those are important to remember. So the daguerreotype, this was the very first popularized kind of photography. It was extremely sharp. It was free for people to practice. It didn't cost them anything. Unfortunately, it was toxic because you used boiling mercury. And second of all, there was only one image, so sort of like a Polaroid, right? So there was no negative. You couldn't make a copy of a picture, but unless you took a picture of the picture. That are two of its kind of drawbacks. Cheap, free, really, extremely finely detailed are positives. Toxic, and only one exists are the negatives, right? So that's a daguerreotype camera. Again, this is that image. And we zoomed in on the bottom right to answer your question from earlier, and you can sort of see that the shoe shine guy is like,
Yeah,
he's kind of ghost there now. And even the guy with getting his shoes shined is kind of moving a little bit, as everybody does. So, but I think that its exposure time was probably about 10 to 15 minutes, right? Long enough where all the people and the horses disappeared, but short enough where it captured that one guy standing there for that long. If you're interested, you can sort of follow that link and learn more about it. So this is what a daguerreotype looks like. If you remember in class, I tried to show you some of mine, right? They're always in that case because the surface of a daguerreotype is extremely fragile. So they put them in these, glass cases with a nice elaborate mats around them. And they had a sort of box that I'll show you in a second on top of it. So that's sort of another disadvantage of a daguerreotype, is that they're really fragile, and just touching it once, that fingerprint will always be there. So here's the case in the upper left corner that you can see, right? There's a sort of leatherette or actual leather case around it. That case has a cushion on one side to protect the glass. And these were the way they were preserved over time. One of the problems is if that case over 175 years or more has cracked in any way, air has gotten into the surface of the daguerreotype, and they start to fade away because of pollution and other kinds of just airborne stuff. They're also very hard to see. If you remember, you have to get just at the right angle, right? We talked about it being a mirror with a memory. That was a phrase that's been used to describe daguerreotypes. They're just very shiny. and it's polished silver, so of course they are. And you have to get it in just the right light to see it. So that was Daguerre. You know, he was a great businessman. Remember, he sold the daguerreotype process to the state of France, which meant it was free to anybody who wanted to use it. You didn't have to pay a licensing fee or anything like that. You could just buy the equipment and start going. He's in Paris, extremely popular. That process became extremely popular once it was fast enough to do portraits. In England, we had this guy, Henry Fox Talbot. Fox Talbot was doing his own research. He was, you know, Daguerre was a businessman, sort of showman. Fox Talbot was more of a landed gentry, just old white rich guy. And he had, you know, gone to college and all that stuff. And so he was also working on how to take that image from a camera obscura and preserve it over time. And so his process was done on paper rather than on polished metal. And the huge advantage of his process was that the image that came out of the camera was actually a negative. And then you could print that negative as many times as you want into a positive. And so his big thing was, let me just show you the positive negative process, right? So on the left, we have the image as it came out of the camera. On the right, we then have the image printed from the negative. And in theory, at least, you can make as many copies as you want, right? So this was his first image that he published. Remember, the latticed window was a symbol of wealth, that if you could afford glass to put in your windows, meant you were kind of a rich guy. And this is kind of him showing off his wealth in a way. It's very small, by the way, and you know, fading as we speak. So it's called latticed window, 1835. So there's a date we should remember about that, right? So again, Fox Talbot's process involved a positive and a negative. He would then essentially use melted wax to wax the paper to make it translucent so that they could get the prints on them. But even then, after they were waxed, there was still the fiber of the paper that came through onto the positive, which meant they weren't nearly as sharp as a daguerreotype, right? Because they were on a negative, on a paper negative, that then transferred to the positive was kind of slightly soft. Yes, there's a question. Who has your hand up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I just want a clarification on the date for the first daguerreotype. Was it 1826? Or was that for the first photograph?
1838.
Thank you so
first,
much.
First photograph is 1826, right? That's the.
That's 1826.
Right. So these are only those three dates are really the only ones I'll ever need to know from you. So I just want to make it clear that I do want you to remember those three dates. All right, so Fox Talbot patented his process. If you wanted to use his process, you had to pay a licensing fee to him. That licensing fee was actually pretty expensive. And so not many people adopted the calotype or the Talbot-type process because of that added expense on top of the materials and the equipment and all the other stuff. And also because the daguerreotype was sharper than the calotype, people, you know, sort of preferred that sharpness in a way. These two guys, though, were living in Scotland, and Scotland has never liked, you know, that they're part of the UK, so they just did it anyways. And they were kind of the earliest portraiturists to use the calotype process, and they're really amazing portraits, actually. So then our sort of fourth kind of early first thing, this is the cyanotype process. It was not invented, but it was used by Anna Atkins, and this is considered the very first book of photographs ever published. So go estrogen, there you go, it's in. And these were direct images, remember? She laid the pond scum, the algae, British algae, onto the cyanotape paper and then let the sun burn the image in. Then you just wash it. There's really no processing or anything. These were for a paper that she was giving about algae. It really wasn't about the photographic aspect of it that was so important, but over time, that has become kind of important. So I talked a little bit about the Grand Tour and how that became important for the invention of photography. Most educated Europeans, at least, would do this journey where you would sort of stop at all the highlights of Western civilization. And, from our perspective now, of course, that's an incredibly narrow view of the world, but you'd go to Rome and you'd go to Florence and you'd go to, Venice, Paris, and most people would only travel once in their lives. And so if they couldn't draw, they didn't really have a record of what they had seen and where they had been. And so Fox Talbot in particular was very frustrated with his inability to draw accurately. And that was one of the impetuses for him to invent the calotype process. So here's the three first photographic processes sort of summarized. We haven't talked about wet plate yet, but that's the next one. Remember, the first two were sort of almost at the same time, the daguerreotype and the calotype. Both of them had their pros and cons, and you should sort of remember that. You'll be asked to know that. And then the third big commercially viable process that came along was the wet plate collodion process. And we talked in class how it gave you a sharp negative because it was on glass. So you got a very sharp print from it. So you can make as many prints from the negative as you wanted. So yay, Talbot's idea of the negative. And then the sharpness, of course, was from the expectations that daguerreotypes had set up. But the only problem with this is you have to actually pour the plate, sensitize the plate, expose the plate, and process the plate before it dries. And that's a lot to have to do, which means you always have to have a darkroom with you. And I'll show you a portable darkroom in just a minute. Magic lantern shows were another thing that was happening about that time. These are kind of precursors to movies, in particular, the Phantasmagoria were sort of precursors to scary movies. But these were shows that you would buy a ticket for and go and sit in a seat and things would happen in front of you. We talked a little bit about the tableau vivant, which is a kind of almost like a performance art piece where people would dress up in costumes and recreate scenes from literature or the Bible or whatever they were interested in. And then the concept of the sublime. Remember, the sublime is the idea that things are vast and overwhelmingly huge, and you feel like a tiny, puny human in front of the mountain or the Grand Canyon or the waterfalls upstate, as opposed to the beautiful on the other side, which was really small and light colored and smooth. And so these two opposing ideas of opposite kinds of visual art. There's the small and the beautiful, and the soft and the light toned, and then there's the majestically large and overpowering, often sort of implications of darkness and scariness to them. And then somewhere in between those two is the picturesque, by the way. I didn't bring that up yet, but that was the other idea. So I mentioned this a few times, but you press the button, we do the rest was the logo for Kodak Corporation for generations. I think you could probably still go to a drugstore and buy a preloaded Kodak camera, a plastic one, and take pictures and send the whole camera back to the lab. And so the big innovation with this process, of course, was that it was on flexible film rather than on rigid glass or metal. And so you could buy, when you bought the Kodak camera, the first Brownie, it came preloaded with 100 pictures worth of film. You took your 100 pictures and then you sent the whole camera back to the Kodak Corporation. They processed your film, they gave you the prints, and then they reloaded the camera for you for the next round. And that's what they meant by you press the button, we do the rest. All the other processes, you had to know some chemistry, you had to know some optics, you had to be able to do certain physical skills like coating the plate, for example, or sensitizing the daguerreotype plate with toxic chemistry. Kodak then made it anybody can be a photographer. So no technical skills necessary. These are some examples of the Kodak snapshots that were returned. They were smallish, sort of like, I think I showed some in class, like, you know, maybe 4 inches across, round and square. This is actually the Barnum and Bailey circus coming into Manhattan. So this was the first commercially available camera that you could buy preloaded. It's called the Kodak Brownie. It was another date you should know, actually, so that makes 4 days. 1888, that one's kind of easy to remember, I think. 1888 was when the Kodak Brownie came out. It was $2 then, which is like probably about $60 today. And yeah, so here's another version of the Brownie. And we talked briefly about the Kodak girl, so to speak, the image of the independent young woman who was able to go out and explore the world with her camera. This was part of Kodak's marketing campaign initially. And it's really kind of incredibly sexist, but it was like, look, even women can use it. I know that sounds really horrible in the 21st century, but that was kind of the implication of this. It's so easy, even women could use it.
They can use it, but not to vote.
Exactly. And many, many other things like own land or have a bank account or anything. But that image of the Kodak girl really, you know, it continued at least up until the 1960s in their marketing material.
Was this camera also like you send it back and they also process it, the same process? Okay.
Yeah. So she's holding a Brownie in her hand. And remember we talked about the name, where it came from? Some people think it was like the sound of the shutter. They went Kodak, Kodak, but it wasn't. It was because George Eastman, the founder of the company, thought that the letter K was a power letter. And so he thought the more he could use the letter K in his advertising, the more, you know, people would buy his camera. And so he invented the word to use the power letter K. So then, you know, Kodak had a long run of being really probably the most popular, at least, you know, for amateurs, film cameras. You know, they did all kinds of processing. They had color materials. Kodachrome in particular was one of the greatest color photographic materials ever made. They made film for movies. They did chemistry for all kinds of other industries other than photography. And then in 1975, one of their researchers invented this, which is the first digital camera. And it's kludged together with that's an audio cassette, but cassette tape to hold the image, held the bits and bytes. That's an old Nikon lens that's been sort of cobbled onto this ugly looking base. And so Kodak invented digital photography. And of course, they had been working with NASA, you know, secretly to send satellites up into space, and satellites can't drop film down every week, but, you know, they had to have a way to send imagery down from outer space. And so the DSLR, the digital cameras that we're used to now, really evolved from like Cold War technology. But the point of this one is that Kodak, you know, really dropped the ball. They invented digital photography and then just like ignored it. Omari, is that a hand up? Okay. We talked about Muybridge. Remember him? He's that sort of really colorful life where he shot his wife's lover. But most importantly, of course, is this image of Sally Gardner, the horse, and this idea of when a horse gallops, do all 4 of his hoofs come off the ground? And you can't see that with the human eye. So in conjunction with Leland Stanford of Stanford University, he invented the first so-called high-speed shutter. And that was able to then capture a horse in motion and show that, yes, indeed, the hooves do come off the ground. So he then went on to spend most of the rest of his life kind of making thousands and thousands of plates of, all kinds of animals doing all kinds of things and humans doing all kinds of things. But this particular image was the first one and the most important one. And there's his set. Remember, he had thread running across the set directly to the camera's shutters, so that when the horse rode by, he'd break the string and the shutters would go off. That's what the shutter looked like. And of course, prior to this, the shutter was you'd take the lens cap off and you put it back on. So this was kind of a big deal. And as I said, he did, spent the rest of his life doing these of all kinds of activities. He thought of them as sort of reference photographs for artists that might be doing paintings or drawings of the human figure in some way. And so that was his reasoning, horses, how do you paint or draw a horse jumping over a fence or whatever that is. Dromedaries, or those camels, birds in flight, all kinds of bizarre things. And actually, if you Google him, and you'll find some really, really strange ones. Another important sort of development was the idea of 3D photography. So, the way we perceive depth in the world is that we have two eyes, and each one sees a slightly different image, and that's what then tells our brain which things are closer to us and which things are further away from us. And so sort of using that idea, in particular, Oliver Wendell Holmes invented this thing called the Holmes stereoscope, and uses this concept of two slightly different images in each eye. And then these cards, these stereo cards, would be inserted into the viewers, and you would have this kind of virtual reality almost experience where you would see.
Can you please go back to the image of the vision, of the human vision? Thank you.
So I put this up on Blackboard this morning, so you can all refer to it over the week or 2 weeks. And stereopticon cards became very popular, a lot like television was in the late 20th century. Netflix is now. This was what a lot of people would do after dinner. They'd sort of get out the stereo cards and sit around and sort of virtually visit faraway places that they could never actually go to physically, but that the world was coming back to them in their living rooms or parlors or whatever you want to call it. And so, probably the most popularized version of this was the Viewmaster, by the way, invented by an African-American man. And so the Viewmaster uses that same idea as the stereoscope, which is of course still the same idea as contemporary virtual reality. If you play any 3D games with a headset on, then that's the same idea, right? Google Cardboard device was given away by the New York Times, and you sort of drop your telephone, in your iPhone or whatever phone you use, into this box, and it has this kind of similar idea that you then are seeing moving images in 3D.
I had that with Bugs Bunny.
The Google Cardboard?
Well, the Viewmaster.
Viewmaster, yes.
Yeah.
I had Peanuts, those characters, Snoopy and Charlie Brown. We talked about this. I'm not sure why I put it in there twice, but I do remember. So this idea of the sublime that we talked about earlier sort of led to the parallel surveys. That there was 4 different journeys that were sponsored by the U.S. government to go to the American West, which of course then was the Native America, and we basically stole it from them. But aside from those very sort of imperialist tendencies of our government, the idea was to take pictures of these beautiful places to encourage people on the West Coast, on the East Coast, to, I hate the word, but manifest destiny, meaning the inevitable expansion of the United States across the whole continent of North America, except for Canada. And so these pictures were, I kept reiterating the fact that my favorite photographer of that generation was Timothy O'Sullivan. And so here's his wagon, his darkroom wagon. He used the wet plate collodion process, right? An image of Shoshone Falls, I think. And tufa knobs. So tufa knobs is something that comes back again. It's also called the pyramid in domes. We saw tufa knobs in the third view in the Rephotographic Society later on in the 20th century and then the 21st century. Remember that O'Sullivan often, not always, but often put something in there to sort of emphasize the human scale. So down here in the lower left, you'll see tents. Another one of the West Coast photographers is Carlton Watkins. He's not going to be on the test, but I just wanted you to remember that O'Sullivan wasn't the only one of these people. And then Francis Frith, who was an Englishman who had been sort of commissioned to go to the Nile Valley, which was very popular in England at the time. They were looting all of the pyramids and bringing it back for the British Museum. And he made a series of pictures of the pyramids and such, again, sort of to bring these images of faraway places back to people who could not physically ever visit them. So they would see the pyramids at Giza and other things like that, so that the world expanded. In other words, prior to the invention of photography, we didn't really get outside of where we could ride a horse to ever. Most people at least did ever. And now photography was bringing faraway places back to, in this case specifically Europe, but all over the world. And Frith made this whole sort of career out of doing that, and then later went out of business and just kept photographing in England. But so there will be a question on the exam or the assessment about that article, the Morris article about Roger Fenton and the cannonballs on or cannonballs off the road here. So make sure you've read that article and understand how they figured out which one came first. That's Fenton's photography van, his darkroom, if you will, and his assistant. That's not him. But what we're talking about, the landscape, I also talked about a little bit about the urbanscape, and in particular Eugene Atget and his kind of lyrical vision of Paris and in this case Versailles. Still many people consider to be one of the greatest photographers ever. And these are, compared to, let's say, O'Sullivan, whose pictures are monumental in scale and sublime, right? That's the word to use best for O'Sullivan's pictures. These are much more ethereal, dreamy, kind of romantic pictures. They're not necessarily factual representations of things, although they're photographs. They're really more about feelings and ideas. And that sort of led us into the idea of pictorialism. So pictorialism was simultaneously happening in both New York City with the photo secession under Stieglitz, and then in Europe with the linked ring. I didn't go into the linked ring, but I'm just going to mention that right now. And Stieglitz was corresponding with the European photographers. But anyways, Stieglitz had this idea that photography could be more than a document. It could be more than just evidence of something, but it could instead be its own art form, its own visual art form. And in his case, he sort of tried to justify photography as a visual art form by imitating the look of paintings at the time. You know, at this time, of course, Impressionism was kind of at its height, almost starting to decline at this point by 1903 or so. But still, the European paintings that were being seen in New York, especially, were soft and, you know, not realistically rendered, and then they were Impressionism. And so a lot of his pictures and his BFF crony, Edward Steichen, sort of had that same kind of painterly softness to them, rather than, let's say, Ansel Adams' F64 hard edge, you know, stuff. And so one of the photographers that he published in his magazine, which is called Camera Work Magazine, was Annie Brigman. And she was very open to manipulating her pictures. Remember, I showed this whole process, how she got to here by photographing and rephotographing the plate and retouching it. And it's sort of like an early Photoshop, if you will. But that was very, you know, commonplace then for people to manipulate photography, but by hand rather than using a computer. And so the whole sort of, you know, pictorialist era, that was never frowned upon in any way. You were encouraged to manipulate the images as to get the vision that you wanted. Kind of as a reaction, I think, to that soft painterly quality that pictorialism was espousing, was the F64 group. Now, remember, this refers to the smallest aperture hole in the camera. So it's like your eyes are staring at the sun, or the little tiny speck or something. And so the F64 group, on the other hand, said, well, photography, to make it art, it should emphasize its own inherent abilities. And to them, that meant sharp focus of everything in the picture, contrast, and other kinds of ideas of like photographic vision. But why should we pretend to be painters? We're not painters, we're photographers. Let's embrace photography for its strengths, right? And so Ed Weston, although perhaps not the most active member, was certainly the inspiration for the group, and he was a member of the group. When Ansel Adams saw Ed Weston's negatives, for example, he abandoned his career as a pianist, concert pianist, and embraced photography. He said specifically that the negative is like a score, and the print is like a performance of that musical score. And so Weston, perhaps his best known image is the pepper that is sort of suggestive of maybe two figures intertwining together. He was a master technician and also photographs landscapes and nudes. But there is a kind of abstraction to his work. We're seeing that even though, yes, that's a representation of a pepper or of a woman, there is also a kind of emphasis on shape, line, form, volume, texture, the kinds of things that, you know, abstraction began to think about. This is an image in particular, you know, sure, it's sand dunes, but it's also something more almost minimalist in its ideas. I mentioned his obsession with the toilet. And of course, remembering that this was a new thing, that people were moving from a big hole in the backyard, an outhouse, and putting these things inside their homes and having toilets, right? And so this was a huge technological innovation for the world, like plumbing. Wow, that's a big deal. And so, I mean, even my building that I live in on the Lower East Side didn't have plumbing until like 30 years after it was built. And so, you know, we think of like, oh, gross, a toilet. But for people then, this was really something innovative and beautiful and new. And so.
What year is it?
30s.
It's before Duchamp or after?
It's after Duchamp. So then, of course, the person inspired by Weston is Ansel Adams, perhaps the best known of all of the so-called fine art photographers in the world. And so, you know, Ansel had this sort of idea of Well, there's two parts to him. There's the technical part, and then there's the sort of conceptual part. And really, he was trying to preserve nature in his way. He wanted to prevent the kind of rapid developments he's seen happening throughout the country, and he didn't want some of the more beautiful parts of particularly the West Coast to be bulldozed and tract homes put into them. And so that was his idea, like let's sort of show everyone the beauty of nature. And then technically he had this idea of pre-visualization. And basically what that means is that you, before you even press the shutter, you have an image in your mind of what the final print is going to look like. And you do everything possible on the process to get there. There's a lot more to it. There's something called the zone system, and it's basically a way to manipulate where the tones end up on the negative and then on the positive print. But he was a master technician, both in terms of in-camera work and in the darkroom. He wrote some of the seminal textbooks about, one's called the negative, one's called the print, one's called the camera. And these books have been the most influential sort of learning tools for most of the 20th century, really. Another one of his well-known images, Moonrise over Hernandez. There's great stories he tells about this and how he almost missed it. And after he shot it, he didn't think he was going to have anything. And when he got back to the darkroom, he's lucky that he got what he got. But really, a lot of his work, has these sort of large, grandiose skies, sublime rock formations and nature. Again, sort of hearkening back to, Timothy O'Sullivan and how he was able to make what are really quite actually barren landscapes kind of beautiful. Ansel was also able to do the same thing. And so, Weston's, mistress was Tina Modotti. And so Weston was married, but he was having an affair with Tina Modotti. And she learned from him all of the technical aspects of photography, and then essentially left him in New Mexico and moved to Mexico permanently, and became a part of the Communist Party and moved in with the Mexican muralist and his wife, whose names have escaped me.
Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo.
Thank you very much. Yes. So Tina Modotti was also Frida Kahlo's lover. And basically any of the photographs that you've ever seen of Frida Kahlo, she probably took them. There's a few she didn't, but most of them she did. And so she had pants. She wore pants. Wow. And it's too bad that that has to be mentioned, but it's true. And so, her best known images, at least in my view, are these kind of clearly politically motivated symbols of communism. She was really, appalled at the way that the Mexican workers were being treated. She and many other artists, especially, sort of, joined the revolution to support the working person. And so, these are clear symbols of communism. If you ever looked at the Soviet Union's flag, you'd recognize this, but combined with a Mexican hat. So there was a kind of, mix of Central America and Russian political belief systems. The sickle being a symbol of the farmer or the worker, the field worker, and the gun, the bullets, of course, is the revolution. Talked a little bit about Harry Callahan, who's sort of like after F-64, but still embraced the sharpness and contrast of photography. But his were a little bit more abstract. In particular, an image like this that really is just 3-4 lines in it, but suggestive of a woman in some way. Callahan in particular liked to overdevelop his film to get very contrasty negatives. And so, that's what made them kind of this abstract looking thing. Also was Aaron Siskind. And Siskind was teaching at the same place that Callahan was. This was in Chicago. This is mid 20th century, by the way. It's 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know, abstraction had really become the dominant visual art form in painting in particular during that time period. You know, we'd sort of gone from cubism into, you know, all kinds of other isms and ultimately mid-century abstract expressionism. So, you know, these kind of, in a way, are reflective of that move towards less. Less is more was Mies van der Rohe's saying, but, you know, the same idea was happening in a lot of the visual arts. I mean, a lot of the arts, including theater and dance and music and other things. Siskind was a teacher also at that Chicago, what's now the Chicago Art Institute of Chicago, but was then the Bauhaus in Chicago. And Siskind also, you know, as I said, you should look at the negative space, not the rocks, but the space between the rocks. And so this work was also kind of about abstraction and form and the things they teach you in like design 1 classes, right? So then sort of along came the new topographics, which was a reaction to the, you know, F-64 group had been dominant so much of the mid to late 20th century, that kind of, you know, grandiose nature, the beauty of nature with no human interactions in it. And the new topographics group was a real specific response or reaction to that. And very specifically, this Louis Baltz pictures, he did a series of pictures of like storage warehouses being built and like new tract homes, suburban tract homes being built. So instead of showing the, you know, the grandiose nature, he's showing the hand of man. That's the phrase that's often used, the hand of man, right? And so how humans are affecting the landscape. And so, you know, conceptually, that's a big change from the purely natural environment of Ansel Adams or even O'Sullivan into something very different. And this was a show that was held up in Rochester in 1970s. And it included the Beschers, by the way, the German couple that taught at the Dusseldorf Academy for many, many years. So this is the Beschers' work. They shot sort of large format pictures of post-industrial, of the post-industrial world. And they would collect versions of the same shaped object and then put them into these grids. There's never any people in them, by the way. There's never any real signs of time, like no cars that you could say that's the 1967 Chevy or something. They are timeless pictures of, you know, often like abandoned plants or abandoned manufacturing facilities. These are grain silos, so they probably weren't abandoned at that point, but it's hard to say what they're about because they never said that what they were about, but it does seem to be, again, about the sort of like industrial revolution is now rusting away and rotting. Like there's this great 20th century optimism that was modernism, where we thought we could solve every disease and feed the world and have no hunger and, you know, fix any problem with inventing new technologies. And then at a certain point, that all started to peter out. And these pictures to me seem to be about that point in time in the 60s and 70s when all that sort of optimism for the future began to sort of change a little bit. And this image by Robert Adams is another from the New Topographics exhibition. And so Adams, you know, also in the same way Louis Baltz was photographing, in you know, this case, Colorado suburbs. And again, it's that sort of, you know, the way suburbia was being sold to the average American middle class worker was, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a house with a picket fence and a yard and 3 bedrooms for your 2.5 kids. and your wife can stay at home and not have to work. And you can still easily commute to the city and be able to, get a job that pays enough. One person can make enough to support a middle-class lifestyle. That's long gone now, but that was that promise, that idea of the suburbia, that you could have the best of both worlds. Sometimes it was the worst of both worlds in the actuality. People felt isolated and alone, like this poor woman in this house, like, her husband's probably at work, she has nothing to do. And so, or she's overworked and exhausted because she's trying to raise kids and keep the house and feed the family. But, and so that kind of, things were changing. And these are California shoppers. And so, as I mentioned, the Beschers were, Beschers, whatever you want to say, were in the show, the New Topographics exhibition in Rochester, which, by the way, at the time didn't get a lot of attention, but over the years became more and more influential and significant. They were teaching in Dusseldorf at the art school there, and some of their students, in this case, Andreas Gursky, probably the best known of their students, began sort of emerging in the 90s and the 2000s as some of the most significant photographers of that couple of decades. Large format view cameras, by the way, just like the oldie schooly photographers used, the hood and the whole bit with the bellows and all that stuff, they're still using that stuff. They're not digital images captured with a digital camera because they don't have the resolution that film does, especially large format film still. And so, but the prints themselves are what are called digital C prints. So they are sort of half digital, half traditional color prints, large scale prints, huge things. Candida Hoffer being another one of their students who photographs sort of grandiose spaces like an opera house or libraries and things like that. Oftentimes behind the scenes places that most viewers aren't allowed. Here's the New York Public Library's reading room. I think it's opened again, but I don't know if the library is open because of COVID, but the ceiling was falling down a couple of years ago. I had to close this. Also, sort of another person who kind of addresses the ideas of the landscape, of course, is Anna Mendieta. Well, not specifically a photographer, she was a performance artist that used photography to sort of document her performance and her sculptural work in the environment, in the landscape. She died tragically young in a very controversial way. But again, her work was really a lot about sort of the female, the earth being the thing that gives life to everyone, and how women are also the people who give life to humans, and sort of mixing the Gaia mythology with some more kind of sculptural and performative ideas. She's really interesting. There's a lot more to her than that, but and Todd Hito, we talked about his, I called him the drive-by shooter, right? He sort of photographed suburbia again, but this time often at night, often without even getting out of his car, just rolling down the window, or sometimes not even rolling down the window, but shooting through a wind, like a rain on a windshield. And how these pictures have this, again, that sort of idealized promise of suburbia is one thing, and what it really is another. And he's sort of showing the scary, darker parts of suburbia. I can tell you, when I leave New York and go back home and see my folks, it's frightening how quiet it is. I can't believe, like, people feel safe when there's no one to be seen. It's like, I'm freaked out because there's no one around, but he's kind of showing that side of things, right? And so Catherine Opie also sort of photographing architecture, and in particular these highway forms that are also kind of abstract. And these are platinum prints, which goes back to the pictorialist era style of printing. And we had some interesting discussions about Sally Mann. and what we think of her during class. And but these are the images that she's done a few years ago of Civil War battlefields now and what has happened since then till now. Often very bloody battlefields, by the way. Salgado's work in this case with the oil workers and his what they call concerned photography. These are the diamond miners, I believe they were. And you know, he spent much of his career helping workers, he did a whole book called Workers, trying to show the plight of workers, not like all over the world, not just in any one country, but all over the world. And that other block that we talked about was pictorialism. Now, introduced it a little bit. We saw this picture before. We hadn't seen that particular Stieglitz, but again, it's that sort of time when technology is starting to change or fast, and there's telegraphs, and there's, you know, new technologies happening all around the world. And so another one of the artists that was published in camera work by Stieglitz was Frederick Holland Day. And his work is, you know, homoerotic. It's often blasphemy to the church. At the time, this was really transgressive in a lot of different ways, but Stieglitz championed him and really, you know, was a big fan of Day's. So, you know, here's a Gertrude Casebier. So, you know, he's publishing women. He published, you know, a variety of different female photographers' work in the Camera Work magazine. And Alvin Langdon Coburn, who was the photographer who sort of, you know, started as a pictorialist, and then he went towards modernism, and then Steichen. And Steichen was really Stieglitz's best friend. The one he probably, you know, published the most was Steichen. And Steichen had also many phases of his work, right? He was also a fashion photographer. He was also a portrait photographer. He was also an aerial reconnaissance photographer. He was also the first curator of photography at the Museum of Modern Art. And so, and this is another one of his that was from camera work. And remember, I talked about how this was probably, no, it wasn't probably, it was composited from 3 separate negatives. One of the artist Rodin, one of his, you know, most famous sculptures, the Thinker, and then another image of his, or another piece by him in the background.
I think I remember like saying when you showed this the first time that it looked almost godlike, that there were like 3 titans just sitting amongst themselves.
Yeah, that's a great description of it. I think that's really good. And yeah, it's very dramatic, right? It's also very dark. You know, pictorialism, soft, painterly, lots of dark tones, were the kinds of things you would see in pictorialist pictures, as opposed to F-64 and what came after it, right? And so here's one of Steichen's fashion photographs, very iconic image of Gloria Swanson. And then we talked about Misson, who was not part of any of the groups, but was working independently on his own. This is truly a pastoral scene, right? It's got the sheeps in it. It's got the shepherd and the dog, which is also some sort of shepherd dog. And so, you know, very moody. He often used backlighting like this. So you'll see these kind of highlights on the top, like on the top of the sheep's backs in this case, shooting almost directly into the light a lot of times. And Mortensen, who of course was trying to, like Ansel called him the anti-photographer, the Antichrist actually. And so Mortensen also published a dozen or more books about photographic technique. He ran a school of photography. He did workshops and all the things that Ansel also did, by the way. And I think that's where some of the rivalry came from. He was a Hollywood photographer prior to his, independent career. So he learned all the makeup and the lighting and the costume tricks that they used in the movies at that time. For some of his earliest work, he even got access to the warehouses of costumes and clothes that were on the Hollywood movie sets because he was familiar to everyone there. His work was dark, often, like this kind of questioning religion, empowering witches and other kinds of female icons. And that's actually Misson, that shouldn't be there. And so that's the last slide. All right, so I know it's a lot of slides, but it's not a lot of concepts. At the beginning, I was emphasizing a handful of pictures and processes. Those are things you should really try to emphasize in your studying. We talked about how things evolved both visually and conceptually through early exploration landscape photographs to pictorialist era, soft focus, painterly photographs, and then back to F64. And then from our F64, we moved to the new topographics, sort of straight stuff. Armari, yes, you have your hand up.
Quick reaction. I know, I guess you've been making an effort to upload each one of these things to YouTube. But I wanted to ask, like, is this one going to be up as well?
Yeah, I will put it up. I've been questioning whether I should or shouldn't, but yes, I will put it up. So if you want to go and listen to it again, looks like it's about an hour and a half or less long. So
okay, just for a recap,
I understand. But I did send you all a link to the PDF, or I should say I put it into Blackboard and it's there. Edith, you have your hand up?
Yeah,
I have a.
I'm sorry. I was just wondering what type of questions are we having? Like, is it short answers?
Yes, most of them will be, tell me the significance of this photograph. When was it made? Who made it? What's it called?
And are you looking for detail, detail answered, or correct answers? I don't know.
Tried to be very clear in the review about which specific dates you should remember. There's really 4 or 5 at the most. This is one of them, right? This is one of them, right? This is one of them. So other than that, there was one more date that I found later. Oh yeah, Kodak Brownie, 1888.
1888?
So, yeah, 1888. So those are 4 dates, like specific things. These 3 photographs, I do want you to spend extra time understanding the maker, the process, and the dates, and their significance. So that's the 4th one, right? So, if I say, let's see, what's the significance of this image, right? And say, oh, it's the first negative in photography that can be printed to a positive. And it was made by Fox Talbot in 1835. And then if I say, so let's see, tell me about the pros and cons of the first 3 photographic processes. That would probably be a longer essay. And I would ask you to sort of remember the names of these processes, right? What they do well, what they don't do well, why they were popular or not so popular.
I have 2 things to ask.
Okay, go ahead.
One is like this last question that you did. Can I take a picture of the slide and use it, or you want us to memorize it? Can I use my summary I do for the exam in the exam or not? Is it with like what they used to call in my days open books?
Right, I know. I know. I've been thinking about it a lot, and normally my answer is no, but
Okay.
we're not in a classroom anymore. So it's you know, I guess so. I guess it's open book. But once I say that, then there's no reason to remember any of this stuff, right? But it does have to do with the concepts, and that's not something that is written down in this review. So when I am saying something like, you know, tell me about the first three processes, but see, that just makes it, like you just copy this and reword it. So I don't know.
And then I
Well, if
wanted
you-
to say another thing is that when you talked about Siskind came here to Peru in this early 70s, I think, or late 60s, and it really influenced a whole generation of photographers here in Peru. And he took some amazing pictures of Cusco. And I put it on the chat because there is a very canonical photographer in Cusco, maybe we can relate to, which is called Martin Chambi. And he influenced a lot the South American photography school. And the last...
Let me just say that Siskin had a variety of phases of his career as well. He was also part of the New York School of Photography and the social school here that was accused of being a communist during, they were all accused of being communists during the McCarthy era. He had multiple phases to his career, both as an artist and as a teacher. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, he was also of a spiritual school in New York. He was part of a spiritual school in New York. And the last comment is about Francesca Woodman. Would you touch her in the later classes?
She might come up in performance art when I go into that a little bit, but not very in depth.
Thank you.
Just as an example of a performance artist.
Professor, the wet plate collodion process is, it seems like that's what a lot of the people tend to use, the photographers tend to use, especially now. Well, the revival of it. Who invented the wet plate collodion process?
Oh, it was, I know I've been to his castle, actually. Frederick Scott Archer.
Archer,
Yeah,
okay.
but it's not really something I emphasize in the lecture. But yeah, Frederick Scott Archer invented it. And he also invented the dry plate process after the wet plate process. So. Any other questions or thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, for the 1888 day for the Kodak Brownie, is the Kodak Brownie a digital camera, or
No.
what would you call it?
Well, its innovation was flexible film. So instead of taking one picture at a time and having to change the film back for each picture, it came with a roll of film that could take 100 pictures without having to change the film. And so the big innovation of the Kodak Brownie was, first of all, it was idiot proof, meaning you just press the button and they do the rest. And that it came with flexible roll film. So that was-
It's a film camera?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I want to know.
That was George Eastman's real invention, was flexible film.
Do you want us to remember 1975 for the first digital camera as well, or just the Brownie?
No, I mean, with that, I'll probably say, what is this? But then it's all the answers are in the review. So I don't know how to write a test or assessment, I should say, on this. But there we are. That's where we are in this world of online learning. So
authenticity and honesty.
Yes.
Maybe it could be more of our opinion. since you can't
Well,
really
I
use all
think
the
it will,
facts.
I mean, just, you should expect, like, compare and contrast this and that, right? And that will be your interpretation of the ideas. Like, I don't want to give them away, but, yeah, I don't want to give them away. So, you will be asked in some cases to interpret the image conceptually more than name, date, and process, right? Why is this image important, right? What does this image have to do with that image? How was this image, influential on that image, right? So those are things that aren't explicitly in the text of this review. But my hope is that you'll have some grasp or understanding of how certain ideas about making pictures have evolved throughout the first part of photography's history, right? We've gotten up to, at least in the 19th century. So
Professor, is this the only exam type thing that we're doing?
there'll be another one of these at the end. And that's why I keep trying to remind all of you that.
No, the new one, the new question.
The new question, what do you mean?
Oh, no, Professor, I just wanted to ask, what is the format of the testing? Is it like due in a couple of hours, the next day?
It's due, you have from 11:20 until 2 o'clock to do the exam, right? You will email it to me by 3:30 of that day. So that means that you can sort of, make notes and then return to them to fill it out with sentences and things like that.
Thank you.
So essentially what you would expect is a series of slides on a self-timer. I will have emailed you the Word document the day of the test. You will answer the questions that correspond to those slides. So the slides will be numbered. Slide 1. Tell me about the camera obscura. What is it, right? Slide 2. Why is this important? These are not going to be real things, by the way. Slide 3. Who made this? Why is it significant? When was it made? Is that clear? And then at the end, there will be 3 short essay questions. You pick 2 of them to respond to. So you have 3 choices, and you do 2 out of the 3 of the slightly longer essay style questions.
I think that Cole had a question.
Cole, did you have a question?
Oh no, I ended up just putting it in the chat. I just was saying that if you had to look up every single thing during the exam, it would take so long you probably wouldn't finish in time. So I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem. I mean, I think you'll still need to study. It'll just be, yeah.
Yeah, no, I hope that's true. I mean, really, I've been asking colleagues all over the world, how are you guys giving tests in all disciplines? And we're all like, and basically we're all doing what I just explained, asking to give, conceptual responses to the material that's presented in front of them rather than memorize dates and names and things. So.
And we should put things in proportion. It's an exam and a note. I mean,
right.
If you compare it to the hugeness of the world and the cosmos, it's just an exam.
Yes. Breathe deeply, stand up and walk around and stretch your arms occasionally. Sometimes these things seem overwhelming to students, but try not to let that happen. Okay, somebody asked where in Blackboard are they located? They're located in the, and this is just the review, by the way, the PDF deck that I put up this morning is in the course materials part of the 348 Blackboard. I think I put it in 797, but I'm not sure. All right, if there's no more questions, have a nice spring break. Be sure to use condoms, and I will see you in 2 weeks, okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Have a
Thank
good spring break,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.